Don't Poke the Primates by Eldarion. War against a prepared enemy would by all accounts be a costly one. In the decades prior to our declaration of war against the Glacier, both our empires had been busy reinforcing our joint borders, building up our militaries and making the necessary alliances. The longer we had time to prepare ourselves, the more it became clear how costly an all-out war would be. We were still deemed the most powerful, and victory was almost a certainty. But will the cost be worth it? It should come as no surprise that we required a new strategy, one that our enemies would not expect and thus be unprepared for. An attack that will circumvent the defenses, strike deep into their territories before they could react, and hit their core worlds so hard that they could not recuperate. For this, we needed access to another border of Galatia. We needed access to the Terran border. The Terrans were a new phase on the galactic stage. The space travel in its infancy, and their sphere of influence limited. Do not misconstrue my words, however, as the Terrans as a species were surprisingly old. Driven by rivalries and hate, the inhabitants of the little blue homeworld took a long time to reach the stars, as they were too preoccupied with combating themselves. Even as they finally did set out to colonize the little corner of the galaxy, still they lingered on in tribal fashion, scrabbling over every pebble that floated by. They lacked unity, vision, drive. Everything that made a galactic power just that, powerful. Their disunity made diplomacy next to impossible, as negotiations with them as a species meant negotiating with every faction that was even remotely relevant. Bribing was equally impossible for the same reason. They could only agree on one thing, and that was their commitment to neutrality, choosing to stay out of the affairs of the wider galaxy, a cowardly choice by any standards. This did not change our plans, however, and when war with the Glacier broke out, we provided the Terrans an ultimatum: give us passage, or be destroyed. We figured that in the face of our overwhelming might, they would realize that it didn't matter how they responded, as the end result would be the same either way. But still, they refused us access, and so we declared war. As expected, in early engagements, their dutiful attempts at the resistance were swept aside with minimal casualties, and with only minor setbacks in the schedule. Then, however, we reached Leodis, the core world closest to our borders, and a key planet in securing the nearby hyperlane route. Our calculations stated that the world would fall within 3 planetary rotations. 3 rotations came, 3 rotations went, and Leodis did not fall. Our strategists were baffled. The planet wasn't a fortress world or military center. It was a social colony focused on mining and trade. Still, it refused to surrender when we came. Our ships bombarded the planet and leveled their cities, but the Terrans simply dug into the ground, waited it all out, and held the line. Our dropships deployed countless forces onto the surface, but the Terrans leveled their rifles, fought street by street, and held the line. Covert teams snuck in, assassinated leadership, and left them vulnerable, but the Terrans simply promoted others, gathered their resolve, and held the line. By the end, it took 150 rotations before the planet capitulated, and by then it was too late. What we didn't realize was that it didn't matter what kind of settlement it was. It belonged to the Terrans, and they would hold it with tooth, nail, and bone. When we arrived, every citizen was mobilized, every resource leveraged, and every factory converted. In the blink of an eye, they turned a nearly defenseless rock into a fortress, and its population into its strongest walls. It was just a taste of what was to come. For as it happened on Luitis, so too did it happen everywhere else. Prior to our declaration of war, the Terrans were divided, but when our ultimatum came, we gave them something they hadn't had before. A unifying enemy, and a cause to rally behind. In a single stroke, we gave the primates everything they needed to gain power. When our ultimatum arrived, the Terran governments unified. When we fought their delaying forces in the initial stages, the Terrans mobilized en masse. When our siege on Luitis went on, the Terrans shifted production. Every hour that passed, our forces weakened, while they gained strength, and as the war dragged on, we began to realize the graveness of our error. By the time the war ended, we had been driven back to our home world, besieged by Terra and Galatia combined, and forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty. The war had ended, and we had lost, all because of our arrogance and ignorance. In the years that followed, the galaxy examined the conflict and placed the victor's crown on Galatian heads. After all, the Terrans were but a small, weak, fractured force, and the seat at the winner's table was but a courtesy. How could they possibly have been relevant? We know better, however. We had learned it the hard way. We thought ourselves powerful enough to venture in the muck and sweep the primates aside. In truth, we unknowingly stepped on the Chimera's tail and suffered the consequences. And now, Galatia, without us holding them in check, once more drive the galaxy to war. I wonder if they, like we did, will make the mistake of antagonizing the Terrans. I wonder if they will realize their mistake sooner than we did. I wonder if the galaxy will finally realize the truth when Galatia falls. For when the Terrans stand united, everyone else can only kneel. And with this concludes the data entry 918131 called Don't Poke the Primates, written by Eldarion. You can find the link to the origin below, and as a reward for staying until the end, here's your mandatory fun fact. Roman gladiators often became celebrities and even endorsed products. Children would even play with gladiator action figures made out of clay. Also, this sweat was considered an aphrodisiac, and women would mix it into their skincare products. Lastly, if you don't want to miss new narrations, then just subscribe and activate the bell. That's all, and stay healthy, sentient beings. Bye.